In today's lesson, we'll be learning how to find the equation of a line with 2 points. As mentioned in previous lessons, a linear relation is really just a pattern, and a pattern can be represented with an equation. These two equations mean exactly the same thing. In this table of values, you've been only given 2 pieces of important information. You know that figure 4 contains 11 blocks, and figure 5 contains 13 blocks. I want you to use this information to work backwards to find the initial value. Let's start by finding the rate of change. You'll notice that this is an increase of 2 blocks for every one figure number. I'm going to use this rate of change to slowly work backwards to find my initial value. Therefore, just by using 2 pieces of important information, finding the rate of change, and working backwards, I've determined the initial value to be 3. I can now represent this table of values with an equation. We just determined the initial value. It was 3. The rate of change was an increase of 2 blocks for every one figure number. Therefore, the rate of change can be simplified to just 2. So the situation can be represented with the equation y equals 2x plus 3, where y represents the number of blocks and x represents the figure number. In this table of values, we've been given only 2 useful pieces of information. We know that figure 10 contains 23 blocks, and we know that figure 20 contains 43 blocks. Again, we're going to use this information to work backwards to find the initial value. However, you'll notice that this situation is a little bit more difficult. Let's start by trying to find the rate of change. You'll notice over here there's an increase of 20 blocks, while over here this is an increase of 10 figures. If you remember, a rate of change is really just a ratio. We just determined that there was an increase of 20 blocks for every 10 figures. Now, I don't want to know the increase of blocks for every 10 figures. I want to know the increase for every one figure. Now, using cross multiplication or mental math, you can figure out that there is actually an increase of 2 blocks for every one figure. Therefore, the rate of change is an increase of 2 blocks for every one figure, or simplified, you can just use the number 2 as your rate of change. Now, you could use this rate of change and the table of values we just looked at to work backwards to find the initial value, but that would take some time. There must be a better way, and there is. Using this equation in algebra, we're going to work backwards to find the initial value without using that table of values. We just determined the rate of change to be 2 because it was an increase of 2 blocks for every one figure. We also know that figure 10 contains 23 blocks. We were also told that figure 20 contains 43 blocks. You could use that instead. Either way, you'll get the same answer. At this point, we're going to replace some of our variables with their known values. First of all, I'm going to replace the variable of y with the number 23. Next, I'm going to replace rate of change with the number 2. Afterwards, I'm going to replace the variable of x with the number 10. And the initial value is going to stay in the same place. This looks a little bit weird. This looks like 210, but between these numbers is actually a multiplication sign. My next line of work, I'm going to simplify 2 times 10. 23 stays the same. 2 times 10 is 20, and the initial value stays in the same place again. You now want to look for like terms. You'll notice that 23 and 20 are both like terms. Like terms like to be together, which means you can move the 23 over to be with the 20, or you can move the 20 over to be with the 23. I'm going to move the 20 over to be with the 23. Remember, generally speaking, you want to keep numbers and variables on separate sides of the equation. Now, when you bring a term over the equal sign, it becomes the opposite. So this is no longer positive 20, this is now negative 20. And the initial value stays exactly the same. I'm going to remove the plus sign since you don't need it. Should be pretty straightforward at this point. 23 subtract 20 gives you 3. Therefore, the initial value is 3. Now that we have our initial value, we can represent this information with an equation. So the initial value we just determined was 3, and the rate of change we determined earlier, it was an increase of 2 blocks for every one figure, which is the same thing as just 2. Therefore, this situation can be represented with the equation y equals 2x plus 3, where y represents the number of blocks and x represents the figure number.